And I want to thank Andy for joining us. And he can really introduce himself, I think, better than I can. So we're delighted that he's able to join us.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Peter. Thank you, everybody. Looking forward to this. Let me get us going here before I begin. I too love Zoom. 1 second. There we go. So just before I begin here, my name is Andy Lipman. I am 47 years old and I have cystic fibrosis. And the title of my presentation is Warrior Mode. And I'll kind of tell you a little bit about my story. And then at the end, obviously, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask anything. So how did my story begin? My story began actually 3 years before I was born. How many people can say their story actually began before they were even here? But back in December of 1970, Eva and Charles Lipman in Atlanta had a baby girl named Wendy Carol Lipman. And Wendy was born, and Charles and Eva had all these hopes and dreams for her. But unfortunately, Wendy was soon after diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. And because she was very weak and everything that was going on and the lack of treatments for CF and everything like that, there was only one picture taken of Wendy, as you can see here. And Wendy never left the hospital. And unfortunately, Wendy only lived 16 days. And sort of that began my story. As 3 years later, a little less than 3 years later, Charles and Eva decided to try again to have another child. And they had me. I was born with, unfortunately, meconium ileus. In other words, a blockage in the intestine. And therefore, I was soon thereafter diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. And that began my family's fight against the disease that had once taken their daughter, and now their son was fighting. I was born in 1973, as I mentioned, and back then the life expectancy for someone with cystic fibrosis was around 16 years. Like I said, there weren't many treatments around, and sadly, people like me weren't supposed to have dreams of getting older, having gray hair, getting on with their lives, having children, getting married. All that kind of stuff was just, it was considered, it's just not going to happen. And I didn't know a lot about CF growing up, but when I was about 8 years old, I remember pulling up an encyclopedia as I was doing a book report on Christopher Columbus. And my dad had always told me that they bought the encyclopedias because that's where you get information. That's where you get accurate information. I always tell kids today that what's an encyclopedia? I said, it's Wikipedia in writing. Wikipedia that you can actually pick up. It's a little heavier. So I read an encyclopedia about Christopher Columbus, started reading it. But before I got to Christopher Columbus, for some reason, I got to the end of the encyclopedia where I came to the term cystic fibrosis. And it was there that I saw the sentence that forever changed my life. And that sentence was, people with cystic fibrosis don't normally live to the age of 25. And when I saw that, I knew I had CF. I didn't know much about it, except that my mom and dad used to have to do my postural drainage where they would hit my back, sides and front every day, which I made the mistake one day of going into school and actually saying that my parents hit me. We got through that, luckily. But I didn't, but what they would have to do, as many of you may be familiar, is just the clapping on the sides, back and front to clear the mucus from my lungs. And when I read all this and I realized that this disease was a lot worse than I originally thought, and I thought back to some of the kids in my school who had said to me, are you going to die? Are you contagious? All these things because of CF. And my parents had always told me not to listen. I realized it was far worse. I got depressed. I ran up to my room and I just didn't care anymore. And I just remember my mom crying and walking off, and my dad was just very upset. But fortunately, my father wasn't going to take that. He wasn't going to just let me sit in my room and feel sorry for myself. he introduced me to sports, and that next day he got me into baseball tryouts. You see the picture there. That was the first team I ever played on, the Yankees. And my dad gave me hope in that way that I could do this. I could do athletics. I wasn't going to let cystic fibrosis hold me back. And so that was kind of my start into exercise and realizing how important it was. But my mom played a big role too. And that role was one day I was in the doctor's appointment. I had a doctor's appointment and I was at Grady Hospital. And I just remember I was feeling really sick at the time and I had a really bad appointment. And my mom saw me looking at this poster and it was a weight gain drink. And there was a guy on there, as you see there, that's Hulk Hogan. I'm not sure who was on the poster. I don't think it was Hulk Hogan, but the guy looked just like him to my memory. And my mom looked at me and she saw me looking at him and she told me, you know, he has cystic fibrosis, right? I said, no way. And I remember her saying, yeah, he does. And all of a sudden that brought me the one thing that for so long I had lacked because of this disease, and that was hope. And all of a sudden I believed that I could do the things that I never thought I could. All of a sudden that those things, I used to hear parents come up to me and they would say, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I remember thinking in my head, I don't know if I'm going to grow up. And that was always so scary for me. But then when my mom gave me that hope, when she told me that I could grow up, I all of a sudden started having hope and dreams. And that was the start of something really big for me. And if you see that picture right there, that's the old mist machine, we used to call it. That's where I would do my nebulizers. That's all the how I would get any sort of aerosol for me. So I went on with my life. When I was about 16, I got my first sense of independence. And for most people at 16, they get a car, they begin driving, but not for me. I got that thing on the other side. That was the first therapy machine. It was called the Air Up Vest. I think it was the exact pronunciation. It was one of the first models. And it may look big on there, but it was much bigger in person. It weighed about 50 or 60 pounds. And it was as loud as a speedboat. And I just remembered that whenever I had to travel with it, the thing was so heavy when it would have to come down, you know, when you were getting all your luggage, and it would be the loud one that just popped down on the carousel. And everyone looked at you when that thing came down. So, but I was still so happy. This was the first thing I ever had that I realized I could actually be independent and go to college and have a life. And so that was just a really big part of my life. But CF was more than just a physical disease, and not just for me, but for a lot of people. I felt alienated very much so. I got to college, I went to the University of Georgia, and I started realizing that I was very different from everyone. I wanted to be like my friends, but I didn't feel like my friends because I had to do this therapy every day. And I remember one day I was already not doing well in school. I was on academic probation because I was really sick of doing all my treatments and pills and all that. And this girl had walked in and she had seen me doing my therapy. And I just remember her reaction when she saw me and she said, "Oh, I'll leave." And she walked out and I just felt like the biggest freak in the world. I slammed my door. I stopped doing my meds. I stopped doing my treatments. I stopped going to class. I was failing out of school. I was really sick. I was having trouble with breathing. And I remember I used to play basketball and other sports with some of my friends, but I basically stopped everything. I started parking my car away from my fraternity house so people thought I went home for the weekend. And I would tell my parents that I was going to be out doing stuff with my friends all weekend, so for them not to call. And all I would do was just sit in my room the whole time and just be really sad and just look up at the ceiling. I remember I was in my loft and I would just look up in the ceiling and just think of all the awful things that were going on and that I was gonna die by the age of 25, just like that encyclopedia had said. And I just went through a very tough time in my life with all of that. But then, as fate would have it, something good did happen. My friends needed an extra player for basketball. I'd gotten so sick at that point, I couldn't even really move much, but I went in, I played the game. And I just remember I was coughing so much. I was spitting up lots of green and yellow mucus, some with a little bit of red tint, if I remember right. And I just remember during that game, this guy came up and he knocked me down to the ground, just setting a pick. I mean, this is how weak I'd become. He just set a normal pick and I fell down to the ground. He picked me up, and I had gotten so skinny that he was able to take his entire hand and it engulfed my bicep, picked me up, and he asked me, just kidding around, are you joining any weightlifting contests anytime soon? And while it was just a joke and everybody laughed, and that's what we usually did, I didn't find it funny. And I didn't blame him so much as I started to blame myself, what I had done to me. Look at me, you know, I'd given up on life. I just didn't care anymore. And I was getting knocked down. And while this guy was the one who knocked me down, in truth, I was the one who'd been knocking me down most of my life. So it was then I started having goals. I ran back into my room after that game, and I started making a list of things I wanted to do. I wanted to get stronger. I wanted to get healthier. I wanted to do my medicine. I wanted to go back to school. And so I started doing all those things. One of the first things I did was I joined a weightlifting class, not a regular weightlifting class, but the only one available at the University of Georgia that quarter, and that was advanced weightlifting. And so I began working at that. I went from lifting about 100 pounds when I started the class, and 10 weeks later, I was lifting close to probably 180 pounds. I gained weight. My chest was broader. My muscles were a little bit bigger. Actually, I just had muscles at that point. I didn't have them before. And I was proud of myself. For the first time in a long time, I was proud of myself. I remembered when I grew up, I used to take PE. And when I was in that class, my mom used to send a note so that I wouldn't have to run laps with my friends because I would just get so tired and I couldn't finish. And my mom said, it's okay if you can't do it. Here's the note. And what happened to me in this class is there was a waiver to sign. And I just remember it said, if there's anything that can keep you from doing this, please let us know now. And I, for once, didn't put anything. I didn't even mention that I had cystic fibrosis, that I wanted to go at this myself, and there was no excuse. I always said, you know, growing up, CF to me stood for crutch found. I used it as my crutch, and I couldn't do that anymore. So I took the class, did everything. It ended up, after that class, I went back on that basketball court. Same guy, believe it or not, I knocked him down. And I just remember thinking to myself, he can get his own self up, you know, because that's what life is all about. It's about getting yourself up, not depending on anybody else, but depending on you first. And so that's what I began doing. And what I started to begin to realize was that white lie that my mom had told me about the guy who looked like Hulk Hogan, who she said had CF. I realized he didn't have CF, but what I realized was I didn't have to be the skinny kid who couldn't do anything, who made everything an excuse. I could work out. I could do exercise. I could get stronger. I had lifted as much as 300 pounds. I had begun running. I had gotten everything going in my life. And I knew, if anything, I could be a leader. So my story began to change through all this. I went from not being able to move much on a basketball court to running with the Olympic torch. I began running a lot, and soon was running a 10K every year. And the most famous 10K in the world probably is the Peachtree Road Race here in Atlanta. And this year, though we are in COVID times, I will be doing my 24th Peachtree in a row. At the time, I had written 3 books. I will talk about the 4th one and soon to be 5th one coming up. But at the University of Georgia, I had gone from being on academic probation to be a 40 under 40 honoree. And I started an event in memory of my sister, who, by the way, my parents told me about her diagnosis with CF when I was about 25 years old, started writing my first book. As my parents had always told me, I had a sister that died before me, but they had never told me she had CF. And so I decided, with the help of my friends and my family, we decided to start a charity event called Wish for Wendy. And I will tell you later on how much we have raised for that event. And then maybe the best part of all of it, as you can see there, I married my best friend. I married my wife, Andrea. And kind of funny that Andy and Andrea, and my wife and I used to get questions all the time. Did you guys get married on purpose because your names were the same? And I think both of us would tell them, no, that actually probably was one of the things that kept us from not getting married. So let me tell you the history of CF treatment. As many of you probably know, when I started out, as you see that first picture, is postural drainage. That's what I started out with my family. And then, as you know, I got the big machine when I turned 16. And then it slowly got a little bit smaller as I was in my 20s. And that actually is the machine I used in college at the end. And then That next machine is something that's the 105 from Hillrom that I've used several times. I've been using for several years, and now recently the Monarch, which, as you know, for many of you, you're more mobile. You can go do things. You can just charge it, and you can kind of walk around with it, which I think is really cool for someone with this disease. So as cool as that, my wife Andrea said, you know, she knew that my whole thing was being a CF warrior, and you know, I had done a lot of posting on Facebook about other people that were doing so much with the disease and were accomplishing so much. And I remember growing up, I didn't know anybody else with CF. There was no internet, there was no social media. And with CF, as you know, with the 6-foot rule, I couldn't get near anybody with cystic fibrosis. And so my parents, Andrea had come up with the idea, why don't you write a book about this, about all these people that are accomplishing things with CF instead of just posting it on Facebook? And so that's what we did. So my 4th book was called The CF Warrior Project, 65 Stories of Triumph Against Cystic Fibrosis. For those of you who may have picked it up, may have read it, there's some incredible stories in there. These are just some of our warriors. We have one who's actually on the dance team. She's actually the captain of the dance team for the Philadelphia 76ers. We have a professional wrestler. We have runners. We have workout trainers. It's just pretty incredible. Just some of the storylines in the book include a teenager who is able to get access to a breakthrough drug for her entire country. A man running a marathon after a transplant, but not just that, he ran it with his surgeon who performed the operation. We have a scientist who made a key discovery in the fight against his own disease, and he is also now in his 70s. A woman diagnosed in her 60s who is now in the best shape of her life in her 70s. A man who actually climbed Everest after 3 attempts, a touring acrobat in Belgium, a Hall of Fame triathlete in Canada, several reality TV stars, and believe it or not, several professional athletes. Who jumped on board for this project? We had several people who jumped on board. Many of you know Chipper Jones, who's from my hometown of Atlanta, who played for the Braves. Lewis Black, comedian. We had Colton Underwood for The Bachelor, who does a lot for CF through his own Colton Legacy Foundation. Megan Fox, who is an actress, and Celine Dion, who lost a niece to CF, Karen. And Celine is one of the most famous singers of all time. A portion of the proceeds from the book are going to the Wish for Wendy Foundation, which we started in memory of my sister. And we have raised through book sales, through a charity softball tournament that we've done for 20 consecutive years. We have raised over $4.3 million for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And other things that have gone on in the last few years. Many of you know some of the drugs that have come out with Kalydeco, which I was not a candidate for because of my gene mutation, but 4% of the CF population was. Orkambi, which many of you are familiar with, which about half the CF population was able to do that. And then Symdeko, which has obviously been just another big drug that has come across for the CF population. And you know, we've talked about the medical side of things. I won't get into it very much, but these are, if you look on my slide, these are kind of why drugs like this are effective for those with CF. And as I've mentioned several times, this is not a cure for CF, but if it can alleviate symptoms, how exciting is that, you know, as we move forward? But I do hope we find a cure someday. I know what many of you saw that and were like, where's Trikafta? Well, Trikafta is something I started back in November. I had learned about it being approved by the FDA actually the same day I happened to be on the Today Show talking about being a CF warrior and all that we are doing to try to raise funds for the CF Foundation. And Trikafta, as many of you know, helps 90% of the CF population. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't help everybody. And my goal is still to help everybody to get a drug that is a major treatment for CF. As obviously, if you're 12 or younger than 12, or you've had a transplant, although some people with the transplant have started Trikafta, but other countries don't have the availability right now to get Trikafta. Some do, but a lot of them still do not. And we are just we are hoping that more drugs become available, especially for nonsense mutations. As you can see, my genotype, I'm a Delta F508 and a W1282X, which is the nonsense mutation and is mostly a genotype from Israel, or Ashkenazi Jews in Israel. So Trikafta has been a whole new world for me. As I mentioned, I started in November of last year with very low expectations. Honestly, I didn't think it was going to do much. I hoped it would, but I had never seen a drug in my lifetime that did this much. I remember growing up and I would go to CF appointments and I would always ask if there was a cure, a major treatment coming. And my doctor every year would say 7 to 10 years. It began to sound like a prison sentence, 7 to 10. But eventually it became real. And that was when I started Trikafta, and it gave me opportunities to spend more time doing things with my family, not feeling out of breath. I went from when I would run, I would probably cough 4 times per mile. That was kind of how I measured things. And after Trikafta, maybe once a mile, if at all, was I coughing. I rarely coughed as much. I just felt this, I could take deep breaths. It felt like for the first time in my life, I was taking deep breaths. And that was such an exciting part of taking Trikafta. But as exciting as Trikafta was, then came the pandemic and everything kind of changed. But what I've come to realize with the pandemic and with COVID, you have to be able to manage your risks and your fears. You have to be able to look at things. And I came up with something called health, which I didn't list on here, but I'll kind of tell you what that is. The most important things you can do during this time with what is going on with the pandemic, health. So the acronym is this, H. And the first one is health, with regards to your physical health and you staying strong, doing your treatments, making sure all your meds are ordered, and just keeping everything in line. And biggest thing, just compliance, medical treatment compliance, something I didn't do for a long time in college, but you've got to be able to do that. Then the letter E, exercise. Exercise as much as you can. I exercise for about an hour and a half a day, but everybody's level of exercise is different. Some can do it less, some can do it more, but whatever you can do to stay in good shape, that would be great. A, attitude. Stay positive. Look at the bright side of things. Maybe things aren't the way you'd like them to be, but it could always be a lot worse. L, less focus on media, whether that's social media or the news, whatever, because I know it can be a downer sometimes. Stay positive and don't look at that kind of thing. If you can, take breaks. T, talking to others. That goes into mental health. If you need professional help, please feel free, go do it if you need it. I see a therapist and a psychologist, and it has changed my life. It has turned me into someone totally different, someone a lot stronger. And then there's H, and that's kind of one that people don't talk about as much. It's humor. You got to be able to laugh when it gets too serious. And I've learned this through having CF. When you have something so serious, sometimes you have to turn the room around and make people laugh, and that's what keeps me going. And these are just some of the things that you have to do. And of course, not giving up. You just can't give up. You got to keep fighting, and we will get through this. We will definitely get through this. So with median life expectancies, like I said, when I grew up, when I was born, it was 16. When I was 8, 9 years old, it was 25. Today, I think it sits at about 37.5. And I recently read something that less than 5% of people around the world with CF are 40 years or older. And when I see that, I think about it, but I say, however, my life isn't about statistics. And I will tell that to anyone I meet. It's about something far more important. It's about hope. Those are my 2 children and my wife. I've introduced you to Andrea, but those are my 2 kids, both through in vitro fertilization. My 14-year-old Avery, my daughter, and then my son, that's Ethan, he's 12, and they're the light of my life. And they were not supposed to, I was not supposed to have children. Like I said, I was not supposed to get married, and there's my wife. I was not supposed to have children, and there are my kids. And I was not supposed to be here today, but I guess here I am. So there's my contact information. If anyone wants to get in touch with me at any point, please feel free to do that. But I want to leave you with one last thing before I leave, or before I take any questions, and that's warrior on. Because when I was little, I used to dress as Superman, but I never thought I could be him. Growing up, though, IVs, coughing, bad doctor's appointments, you name it. I realized that I could be Superman. We all can be our own version of Superman. And I will continue to warrior on. And I hope all of you can do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and end my presentation there and take any questions that anybody may have.
Andy, it's Christian. Thank you so much for that great and fantastic story. So inspiring.
Appreciate it.
There is a question. Bianca Lord says, "Hi Andy, very inspiring story. How can I inspire my now adult son to start to exercise more? He starts strong, but gives up because he's discouraged due to muscle pain and breathing problems."
Well, you know, I like to tell him this is something I heard one time, and there's a guy who is a grandparent. He's about 80, 90 years old, and he's looking back, and he thinks to himself, man, if I had just done some of the things I could have done then that I really want to do, but I didn't, you know, I have regrets. I have regrets that I didn't go do it. We call this the rocking chair theory, that if you look back and you say, man, I wish I had done some of the things I didn't do. Well, here's your chance. You're still there. You know, you're still young. Go do it. You know, I know it hurts sometimes. I know it's exhausting, but think about the possibilities and think about being your own. My friend Jerry Cahill, he's over at the Boomer Esiason Foundation, talks about being your own hero, be your own superhero. You know, be your own superhero. Look at it and say, hey, yeah, this is going to be difficult, but in order to turn from Clark Kent to Superman, you got to start somewhere. You know, you got to keep exercising, you got to keep working out, you got to stay compliant, because you have a chance to create a legacy. You have a chance to do something so important, not just a legacy, but you have a chance to help others. And what a great opportunity that not only will you be helping yourself and the family who supports and loves you, but you'll be helping people around you who need you, people who need to believe. I look back, I was at my charity event one day at Wish for Wendy, and I remember this kid who had CF who had walked into our event with his dad. And his dad looked at me and he looked at his son, his name was Toby, and he said to his son, look at him. You could be just like him. And what it reminded me of is seeing that poster growing up that my mom told me that the guy had CF, even though he didn't. But now this kid, Toby, can look at me and say, he does have CF, and I too can be him, or I can be even stronger. So I would just say, you've got a story to tell, start working on it now. And it's not just through writing it, it's through living it. So that's what I would say. Does anybody else have any other questions that I can answer, or any jokes you want me to tell?
Well, I know, Andy, this is Peter Mogeza. We had talked earlier before the meeting about your thoughts on how you're approaching the holidays and COVID, and sort of what to think about and how you think about all those things.
Sure. I will tell you that my family, what we do is we try to, you know, my children are 12 and 14, so we try to have them involved in a discussion about what we can do, how we can do it. And we do try to make compromises with regards to, can we have people outside come over, as long as they stay at least we probably do about 10 feet apart, and wearing masks. If we have to go in any place, we make sure we wear masks. And like you said, when we're out anywhere, we social distance, wear masks, do whatever we can. But we do try to keep everyone involved. And, you know, growing up with CF, I'd always heard, I can't live in a bubble. I can't live in a bubble. And I think the same applies. You can't live in a bubble, but at the same time, you have to be smart. You have to be educated on what's going on. You have to be cautious, and you have to follow the numbers. You know, we look at the COVID numbers, whether they're up and down, and my kids are so great at it. I'm amazed at their ages that they are very, very good about being proactive with regards to looking at everything and talking and being able to talk about it. And my wife is amazing with it. And we have really good conversations about what is the best thing to do and how can we compromise. My son, for example, played baseball this fall. We didn't do it this summer because the numbers were so high, but the numbers lowered this fall. And so we made a deal with him that he would have to wear a mask. He was probably the only player that wore one. He could not sit in the dugout. And as far as that goes, whenever he would drink his water, he had to put on his hand sanitizer before and after when he did it. And he had to wear his mask when he was, running the bases, or if he played first base, because he would be near people. So, these are little things. Our kids, in Georgia here, kids are going back to school. So my kids know, like everyone else, everyone wears masks, and they're very good about it, and they do the right things. And we try not to put added pressure on them, because there's enough that they have to deal with, that any kid has to deal with a pandemic. But, we just say, try not to live in a bubble, try to be somewhat cautious, but at the same time, live your lives and find compromises where you can live your life, but you can do it in a smart and safe manner.
This has been a fabulous talk, Andy. Are there other questions from the group? Please type them in for the chat or question and answer. One more thing while we're just waiting. I often get asked about telling people that you have CF. What are your thoughts, and how do you approach telling people? I know you're very public about it now, but when you were younger, about kids telling people at school, telling people at a job, what are your thoughts on that?
As far as being a kid goes, I didn't tell anybody when I was a kid, and my advice to parents for their kids is let your kid make that decision. Like, even if they're 7, 8, 9 years old, let them make the decision when they're ready to come out with it, because it is very difficult when, especially with kids. Kids have no filters. When I was growing up, like I mentioned, people had asked me, "You have CF or cystic fibrosis. Does that mean you're going to not live very long? And are you going to, are you contagious?" And all these kind of crazy questions that I would get. But, things have changed. There's a funny quote someone once gave me recently, saying that if you're going to have CF, this is the time to have it. Because everything is so, we're making so many great strides with the disease. But I would say for kids, I would say let them make the decision on when to say it. But as far as when you're older, I do find it, by being open about the disease, it's therapeutic. I found it very therapeutic for me. I know I'm mega open and not everyone is like that, but it has really helped me out to do that. But I remember when I was dating and stuff like that, it was hard. I didn't mention it on the first date or two, but I did mention it relatively early on after a while, because I didn't want to lead anybody on, and my dad had once told me something that he was so right. He was like a fortune teller. He told me, when you meet someone who accepts your CF and loves you for who you are, you will find someone extremely special. And I did with my wife, Andrea, and even people, before that I had dated that were really great. But my wife is one of the most special people that I know. And she not only accepts me for CF, she accepts me for who I am, for the humor that I throw out there that probably drives her crazy, and just for what I do on a daily basis. But I love her to death, and she's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And so I would just say that. I would say, be forthcoming. You don't want to have to react and tell people later on. It's not as much fun that way, but it's a lot easier when you can say it early on and just get the elephant out of the room, if that makes sense. So that would be my advice there.
And Andy, I think there's just a couple of more questions here. From Mark: what motivates you on the days that you don't feel good? The last thing you want to do is exercise or get moving.
Well, it's funny. I would say the first thing I'd want to do is exercise and get moving. But that took a while. For a long time, I didn't feel that way. But now it's like I realize that exercise can help that. So if it can help it, I'm going to do it. And I have extra motivation. That's my family. But I want to get better as soon as possible. And that means being proactive. As soon as I start having any sort of symptom, I call my doctor, or call the office, whatever. And I start doing different exercises, maybe something that I think will work a little bit better. I do a lot of running and jumping jacks, jump rope, whatever it takes. But yeah, I guess I just think about it. I don't want this to get any worse. If exercising can get me stronger, then I'm going to do it. I never want to have any regrets right when I get sick. When I was in my teens and 20s, I would never tell people when I wasn't feeling well, and it would just get worse and worse and worse. And now I've started to realize the more proactive you are, the better chance you are to get better. So that's something that I really do. As soon as I don't start feeling well, I better get up and get working. I guess that's the way I look at it.
And then a question for Kathleen, what's your daily airway clearance regimen that you do?
Okay, so what I do is I wake up early in the morning, probably about six or so, and then I do my vest therapy. Sometimes I will do that for about 45 minutes or so, and doing, at the same time doing my aerosol. And then after that, a lot of times I'll do my medication, that's Trikafta, that's any sort of supplement or anything that I'm taking, antibiotic, whatever it is. And then after my Trikafta, I wait about 30 or 40 minutes, and then I go exercise. I work out on weights for about 30, 40 minutes, and then I run for about 30 or 40 minutes. And I tell people, they're like, but that's not your medical treatment regimen. That's your exercise and your medical treatments. I said, well, I put them together because I think both of them together are what gets you better. So I include them. They're all in one. You don't separate them. I work out every single day. I run every single day, and I do my therapy every single day. And I do my treatments twice a day. I do enzymes with all meals, and I do sinus treatments in the morning and at night. And that's kind of it. I do Miralax a few times a week for my digestion as well. And I guess you would say that's kind of the whole thing for me.
I think just one final question for you, Andy, from Ian, which is, what age were your kids when you discussed your diagnosis of CF, and talk to them about that?
That's a great question. I actually have a YouTube video where we talk about it on there, but it wasn't when I introduced it to them. It's when we talk about it and what they think it is. But I think they were very young, like 3 or maybe 4 or 5 years old. I didn't want to keep that from them. I felt like the earlier I told them, the more normal it becomes for them. And what's funny now is when they would have friends come over, before COVID, of course, but when they would have friends come over, they would walk in, seeing me doing my therapy. And my kids didn't even realize it was a big deal. But the other kids are like, what's he doing? And my daughter Avery, or my son Ethan, they would come on. He's just doing his medicine. He does his stuff to get better for his lungs, so he doesn't cough as much. And to them, it was, like I said, it wasn't a big deal. And I think it's because we discussed it early on. And I don't like keeping secrets. I really don't, because it builds up inside. And I learned that a long time ago. And especially, like I said, when I started dating and not telling whoever I was dating about my CF, I started feeling guilty, because the longer it went on, the bigger that secret got. So I tend to reveal it pretty early on. With my kids, I revealed it early on and let them know what it was. And, we don't talk about life expectancy or anything like that. They can read about it if they want to, but I tell them, Daddy does this every day so he can stay strong, and so that he can see you guys get older and do some cool things and be your baseball coach or be your softball coach or do these sort of things, because I love you and I want to be strong for you. That's pretty much it.
So Andy, this has been a fabulous talk, and I think you may not have seen in the chat, but there's so many people saying how inspirational this is to them. And so I just want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us and to share your thoughts about CF and being a CF warrior. It's been fabulous. Well,
I appreciate that. I also probably paid several of those people to put those in the chat. So I appreciate your check's in the mail. But
well, I will make a plug for you that the CF Warrior and other books are on Amazon. So I would encourage people to purchase them, because they truly are inspirational. So thank you so much, Andy.
I really do appreciate it. And thank you guys. And like I said, stay strong during this time. It is going to get better, not just with CF, but during COVID. Everything is going to get better, and we are going to resume our normal lives once again. So take care, everybody.